There were two routes leading northeast to Carne Village from Irantel. One headed north, and then east along the outskirts of the forest. The other went eastwards, then north. This time, they went by the first route. Traveling along the edges of the forest meant that there would be a higher chance of encountering monsters. It was the wrong choice, from a bodyguard's perspective. That said, everyone still wanted to go by that route. This was because Ainz wanted to fulfill the job Peter and friends first offered them, that of monster hunting. Although it seemed like they were taking a great risk, in the same way that a hunter chasing two hares would catch neither, the presence of the mighty Momon and Nabe meant that they could take that route with peace of mind. Another reason was that Nabe had demonstrated the spell Lightning outside the city, in order to prove that she could cast third-tier spells. In addition, they would not be entering the forest, just traveling along the edges. Thus, any monsters that appeared would not be too strong, and could be taken down by everyone working together. It was also a good chance for each adventurer team to observe the others' strength. They had taken these points into consideration before making their decision. After leaving Irantel, the sun was at its zenith, and the travelers could see a vast stretch of dense and primeval dark green forest in the distance. The thick tree trunks stood tall, while their leafy branches spread wide. Because light could not penetrate into the depths of the forest, there was a feeling that they would be swallowed by the blackness. The gaps between the trees looked like a gaping maw, waiting for prey to throw themselves into it, which contributed to the sense of unease that they felt. The group was arrayed around the wagon as they moved forward. Naturally, Nfirea was driving the wagon. Lukrut, the ranger, walked ahead of him. Peter, the warrior, was on the left of the wagon, while Dine the druid and Nina the magic caster were on the right. Finally, Momon and Nabe brought up the rear. Visibility was good, so everyone was not too tense. However, Peter's voice contained its first hint of severity as he spoke.
Mr. Momon, this is a stretch of dangerous area. Although we should be able to handle any monsters that appear, please be careful all the same.
Understood.
As Ainz nodded, he suddenly thought of something. If he was in a game, he could tell what sort of monsters would spawn in a given location. But in reality, that would be impossible. Only the gods knew if a troublesome enemy would show up. After the Battle of Carne Village several days ago, and after interrogating the prisoners of the Sunlight Scripture, Ainz was quite confident in his strength. Of course, that was in his capacity as a magic caster. Now that Ainz was wearing a suit of magically created plate armor, there were very few spells that he could cast. Could he serve as an effective frontliner with all his strength sealed off? In addition, as a bodyguard, his victory condition was not defeating the enemy, but protecting Nfirea from any harm. Ainz felt uneasy as he thought about that. If the situation warranted it, he would remove his armor and use magic. But if he did that, he would have to kill his companions, or alter their memories, and Ainz did not want that at all.
It's a pain in the ass.
Ainz turned to look at Narbarrel, who nodded under his gaze. The two of them had already discussed their plans for emergencies. Narbarrel would cast magic of the 5th tier, if things came to that. And if that did not work either, Ainz would shed his armor and take the situation a little seriously. As he saw the two of them make eye contact, although Ainz was still wearing his full helm, it would seem that Lukrut was under some sort of misconception. He addressed Narbarrel in an airy, light-hearted tone.
It'll be fine, don't worry. Things won't be too troublesome as long as we don't get ambushed, and nothing will escape my eyes and ears when I'm in charge. I'm great, aren't I, Ms. Nabe?
In response to Lukrut's earnest demeanor, Narbarrel merely sneered.
Mr. Momon, may I have permission to pulverize this Aedes mosquito?
Ah, Miss Nabe graced me with her cold words.
Everyone smiled bitterly as Lukrut raised his thumb, but they did not seem to mind Narbarrel's harsh retorts. They didn't think that Narbarrel really thought of humans in general as inferior life forms, just certain individuals. Lukrut in particular. Ainz denied Narberl's heartfelt request, feeling a cramping pain in his non-existent gut.
If only she could hide her inner thoughts while traveling around humans.
Nfirea seemed to have misunderstood something, and he interrupted from the side.
It'll be fine. In truth, the region from here to Carne Village is the territory of the Wise King of the Forest. Therefore, we shouldn't meet any monsters unless our luck is very bad.
The Wise King of the Forest.
Ainz recalled what he had learned in Carne Village. The Wise King of the Forest was a monster that could use magic, and it was frighteningly powerful. Because its lair was in the depths of the forest, there were virtually no eyewitness reports about it, although its existence had been a topic of discussion since very long ago. Some people called it a four-legged silver beast with a snake for a tail, which had lived for hundreds of years.
I'd like to see it.
He did not know if the stories were true or false, but if it really had lived all these years, it should possess a surprising intellect. After all, it was called the Wise King of the Forest. If he could capture it, he should be able to strengthen Nazarick. Ainz pieced together a hazy image of what he thought the monster looked like in his mind.
With a name like Wise King of the Forest, it might be an animal previously thought extinct. Like a monkey, perhaps? An orangutan. That name means man in the forest. Or was that sage? And it has a snake for a tail? Does a monster like that even exist?
Ainz felt that Yggdrasil might have a monster like that. After racking his brain, he found an answer.
A new way! That creature has a monkey's head, a raccoon's body, the limbs of a tiger, and a snake's tail. Although I'm not sure if it really is an Yggdrasil monster. It might have been summoned, just like those angels.
Just as Ainz thought of Yggdrasil's new way, Lukrut called out to Narberl again in a flighty tone.
Well then, if we complete this mission perfectly, I wonder if my lovely Ms. Nabe's affection towards me will go up a little more.
Narberl clicked her tongue, her disgust welling up from the bottom of her heart. Lukrut put on an exaggerated look of shock, but nobody spoke up for him. Everybody seemed to treat them as a comedy duo. In this way, everyone chatted as they progressed forward, under the blazing sun that tanned the skin. Their boots were covered in the juices of trampled grass and smelled of plants. As he watched everyone wiping their sweat, Ainz was extremely grateful for his undead body. The strong sunlight did not fatigue him, and even wearing this clumsy, heavy armor did not tire him out. Only Lukrut remained energetic and cheerful, talking and laughing with the others who were marching in silence.
It's okay, guys. You don't have to be so alert. After all, nothing escapes my eyes and ears. Even Miss Nabe trusts me. Look how relaxed she is.
It's not because of you. It's because we have Mammon.
Narberl frowned. Sensing that something drastic might happen, Ainz put his hand on Narberl's shoulder, and her face immediately softened. Seeing their interaction, Lukrut tossed out a question.
Huh. So, it looks like you and Mr. Momon really are lovers.
His lover? What are you saying? That should be Mistress Albedo.
That's enough, Nabe.
Ainz shouted, despite himself.
What are you thinking?
Narberl's eyes went wide, and she covered her mouth. Ainz coughed, and then coldly said,
Mr. Lukrut, would you please not make such baseless speculations?
Sorry about that. It was just a joke. But, does that mean you have a significant other already, Mr. Momon?
The bowing Lukrut did not look remorseful at all, but Ainz was not as angry as he was just now. It would seem picking Narberl for this expedition was a foolish decision. Still, despite his poor choice, Ainz had no alternatives in the matter. After all, he had nobody else to draw upon besides her. Almost all the NPCs made by the Guild of Heteromorphic Beings, Ainz Ulgon, were heteromorphic beings themselves. There were very few among them who could be brought into a human city. As for Narberl, At least she had a human appearance, even if it was a disguise. Thus, she was one of the few people he could use, though he had not factored her personality into the equation when he made his choice. Given the present circumstances, perhaps another battle maid, Lupus Regina Beta, might have been a better choice. But it was too late to regret his decision at this point. Narbrel's face was ashen white from her gaffe. Ainz patted her on the back several times to put her at ease. A good boss had to forgive the first mistake his subordinates made. The scolding would come when they repeated their mistakes. It would be bad if she fell into despair or withdrew from them, thus affecting their movements. The important thing was that she had only mentioned Albedo's name. There was no need to alter their memories. Probably.
Lukrut, don't talk any more nonsense and stay alert.
Got it.
Mr. Momon, I'm very sorry for my colleague's rudeness. We know that prying into other people's private lives is taboo.
No. I'm willing to let it be water under the bridge, as long as you can be more careful in the future.
The two of them looked at Lukrut's back in unison, and they heard something along the lines of,
Miss Nabe hates me now. Her affection value must be a negative number.
as Lukrut rounded his shoulders in defeat.
That idiot. I'll scold him after this. I pray you will pay no heed to what he just said.
Well, about that.
I'll leave that task to you then. Since Mr. Lukrut's on lookout duty, we can leave that to him.
And I'll talk a bit about myself.
It's fine. We'll make him work hard for the trouble he's caused you.
After Peter smiled to him, Ainz advanced to Dine and Nina. Dine, switching places with Ainz, fell back to walk alongside Narborough.
I have some things to ask you about magic.
After seeing Nina nod his head, Ainz began with his questions. Nfirea seemed interested in their conversation and looked over.
People who have been charmed or dominated by magic might reveal the information they carry. Is there a magical countermeasure that causes people to die after being questioned several times?
I've never heard of a spell like that.
Ainz turned and his helmet faced Nfirea.
Me neither. There are ways to modify a spell so it activates at a certain time, but I don't think they're as elaborate as what you describe.
I see.
Ainz was slightly disappointed when he did not get the answer he was looking for. If that was the case, he would have to worry about how to deal with the surviving members of the Sunlight Scripture later. Since there were so few survivors left, it would be a waste to expend them to no effect. In order to discover why they vanished after death, he had vivisected them with magical medical techniques, but it had ended up as a bust. If they died from that, should he continue prying information from them? After all, losing one man meant losing the chance to ask 3 questions. Even more regrettable was the case of Nigun, who had been the first to die. They had lost Nigun, who knew the most, for the sake of a few simple questions. Still, that loss let Ainz know that he could not take on this world with his knowledge of Yggdrasil alone. So that could be counted as a lesson learned. At the very least, they had learned how to proceed from that failure. As Ainz thought distractedly about that, Nina continued speaking.
That said, I only know a little bit about magic. Perhaps countries which train magic casters on the national level could create spells like that. The Slain Theocracy has academies for clerics, divine magic casters, while the Empire has institutes which produce their arcaners, sorcerers, wizards, and other arcane magic casters. Then there's places like the Grand Republic, which uses something like the spells born of the wisdom of the dragons.
I see. In other words, spells like that could be created with the assistance of an entire country.
According to the information obtained earlier, the Grand Republic was a nation of demi-humans ruled by a council. It was in opposition to the Slain Theocracy, which championed the concept of human supremacy. The most interesting thing about them were 5 of their counselors, who were dragons said to possess awesome power. Ainz was interested in that country, but he had not found his feet in this world yet, and did not have the excess energy to spread his tentacles to that nation at the moment. Just keeping his current schemes running required a considerable amount of Nazarik's manpower.
Then, may I ask about something else?
Ainz continued questioning Nina as he walked, until he was satisfied. He asked Nina and Peter so many things that the other Swords of Darkness looked at him with eyes that said, "Are they still talking?" The topics he touched on were quite diverse, including magic, martial arts, adventurers, the politics of the region, among other things.
Movement.
Lukrut suddenly said, in a voice which held a hint of tension. It was completely different from the flighty attitude he had taken while flirting with Nabe. In his place was a professional, seasoned adventurer. Everyone turned to the direction where Lukrut was looking and readied their weapons.
Where?
There. And over there.
Lukrut said in response to Peter's question. He pointed at a corner of the forest, but nobody could see anything through the clutter of the forest. Even so, none of them doubted him.
What should we do?
We shouldn't force our way in. If they don't leave the forest, we'll leave them alone.
Then the smartest thing to do is follow the plan, and have Nfirea fall back.
As they discussed their next move, there were movements in the forest, and then monsters slowly revealed themselves. There were 15 creatures that were the size of children, surrounding 6 huge creatures. The first group were the demi-humans called goblins. Their twisted faces had flattened noses, while 2 fangs thrust forth from their ravening maws. Their skin was a bright brown, while their filthy, matted black hair looked like it had been styled by wax. They wore tattered clothes, which were a burnt sienna, though it was unknown whether it was dyed that color or stained that way by dirt. On top of that, they had fashioned tanned animal hides into a crude form of armor. Each held a wooden club in one hand and a small shield in the other. They were evil-looking monsters, born of the mating of humans and apes. The less numerous creatures were huge, roughly 250 to 300 centimeters in height. Their lower jaws jutted out, and they looked dumb. Their heavily muscled arms looked like tree trunks. Their hands nearly dragged on the ground due to their hunchbacked stance. They used logs as clubs, and wore animal skins around their waists. They reeked so much that the adventurers could smell them over the long distance separating them. Their tanned brown skin was covered in warts, while their muscular chests and bellies looked quite striking. At a glance, they looked to be very strong, and they resembled shaven, distorted chimpanzees. They were the demi-humans known as Ogres. Almost all of them seemed to carry tattered bags, as though for a long journey. The monsters watched the adventurers warily as they advanced onto the grassy plains. They might have been some distance away, but there was an unmistakable hostility on their ugly faces.
There's quite the number of them. Looks like we can't avoid a fight.
That's right. Goblins and ogres are the kind who will attack once they outnumber their opponents. Or rather, I should say that an intelligent being would probably not judge their opponent's strength simply by their numbers.
Ainz could understand and accept this, but the fact that it was completely different from how it was in the game left him somewhat confused. Be it in height or skin color, the ogres and goblins before him all differed from each other. In other words, they were not identical individuals. It felt like he was faced with 21 unknown monsters.
Reality's different from the game, huh?
He felt like he was fighting unknown monsters in an unexplored region without the benefit of a walkthrough site. As he recalled the feeling of that battle in Carne, Ainz began muttering to himself.
Mr. Momon?
Oh, is something the matter?
Earlier we agreed to divide them in half, but how should we assign them now?
Can't we split into 2 teams and dispatch the enemy as they come to us?
It would be troublesome if they all went to one side. Nabe, can you use Fireball to eliminate all the goblins in one go?
I cannot use Fireball. The strongest spell I can use is lightning.
Ainz thought about the restrictions he had given her earlier.
Lightning is a spell that pierces in a straight line, right?
Then what if we got the enemies to form up into a line and then take them all out in one shot from the side?
In that case, we need a defensive line that can take the enemy's charge.
Let me handle that. Can I trust you gentlemen protecting Nfirea on the wagon?
Mr. Moman,
If a few ogres could give me a hard time, then I'd be all talk. Everyone, please watch how I slaughter those ogres.
As they heard Ainz's confident voice, understanding dawned on the faces of the Swords of Darkness. Their hearts filled with the peace of mind which came from knowing that they could leave that task to him without having to worry.
Understood. However, we can just watch the enemy attack, so we'll support you from the side as much as possible.
Do you need any support magic?
Ah, not for us. Friends from Swords of Darkness, please focus on supporting your comrades.
Please permit us to refuse. If we begin the engagement so close to the forest, there's a chance the enemy might slip past.
If that's the case, do we want to do the usual and lure them out first?
An excellent idea. Samomon will block the enemy's charge, but how will we deal with any fish which slip the net?
I'll hold down the ogres with martial art fortress. Dine, you'll handle the goblins. Ninya will cast defensive spell on me. While it may not be necessary, you should also watch out for Nabe's safety, and use attack spells when possible. Lukrut, go take care of the goblins. If any ogres make it past the defensive line, you'll have to block them too. If that happens, change your priority to wiping out the goblins, Ninya.
Everyone looked to each other and nodded, showing that they understood Peter's instructions. Their combat strategy was smoothly decided, and their silent teamwork was flawless. Ainz, who was thoroughly impressed by this display, made a noise of quiet approval. He recalled Yggdrasil once more. Back then, Ainz and his comrades hunted monsters with the same repeated movements: baiting, luring, blocking, and then attacking. They could fight well as a group because they were thoroughly familiar with each other's strengths. Perhaps he was being biased, but Ainz earnestly believed that their coordination was not an easy thing to replicate. The Swords of Darkness could not possibly compare to them, though he could see something like his own teamwork in their movements.
Mr. Momon, do you need any assistance, other than magic?
No, there's no need. The two of us will be enough.
That's pretty confident.
There was some unease in Peter's words. If the person responsible for holding the line fell easily, it might lead to a domino-like reaction that would end in the team breaking apart. He should have felt uneasy about that. After all, this was not a game, but a battle on which they were betting their very lives.
You'll see once it begins.
Ainz said, terminating the conversation with a curt reply.
Mr. Peter, we'll start once your preparations are finished.
Lukrut drew the string of his composite longbow to its limits until its limbs began creaking. With a whoosh, the bowstring sliced through the air, launching an arrow in a straight line. It struck the ground about 10 meters away from the goblins on the plain. The sudden attack made the goblins sneer at Lukrut from behind their shields. The object of their mockery was the missed arrow. Of course, the goblins could not hit a target that was over 120 meters distant either, but they seemed to have forgotten that. The vast disparity between the attack they had received and their numbers made the goblins' violent instincts swell. They shouted in unison and charged at Lukrut with wild abandon. The somewhat slower ogres followed from behind them as well. Driven into a frenzy by their bloodlust, they did not form up into ranks, nor did they protect themselves with their shields. Their minds were a sea of white. As he verified that fact, Lukrut smiled thinly.
Loose!
He sent another arrow downrange when the enemy was 90 meters distant. This time, the arrow did not fall short, but pierced the goblin's cranium. The goblin at the end of the formation took a few wobbly steps before collapsing to the ground where he died. The distance between them shrank. but there was no worry in Lukrut's hand, which was holding his bow. This was because he was confident that someone would protect him even if the enemy reached him.
Reinforced armor!
Nina cast a spell from behind Lukrut. Hearing his colleague's voice, Lukrut knocked another arrow to his bowstring. 50 meters out, an arrow went through the head of another goblin who collapsed and did not get back up. Dain decided to make his move as well. Although goblins were agile, the ogres had large strides, and so their speeds were roughly the same. That said, over a charge of nearly 100 meters across a grassy plain, the ogres with their stronger legs ended up in front, while the goblins lagged behind. The two groups drew away from each other, and Dain could not get too many of them in the area of his spell's effects. Still, that was enough. After all, Dain's first objective was to pin down at least one ogre.
Twine plant!
Dain cast his spell, and vegetation moved under the feet of one of the ogres, turning into vines that tangled around its feet. Immobilized by the abnormally resilient plant life, the ogre roared in frustration. At the same time, Ainz, followed by Narberl, strolled leisurely forward. They walked like they were taking a stroll, not standing fast against charging monsters. As the ogres running at the head of the mob approached him, Ainz reached his hands behind his back and grasped the hilts of his swords. Narberl too reached under her cloak and brought forth her sheathed sword. Momon brandished his great swords, tracing two great arcs in the air. The dazzling light reflecting off the blades made the swords of darkness gasp in surprise. The swords that Ainz wielded, each over 150 centimeters long, looked exceptionally ornate. They resembled works of art more than tools of war. A pair of intertwined serpents were carved into the blades. Their tips were rounded and wider across than the rest of the sword, like a pair of opened fans. The edges radiated a cold, sharp radiance. They were the weapons of a hero. Ainz was holding a pair of heroes' swords. As they beheld his majestic figure, the swords of darkness drew a breath in unison. If what they had seen before made them gasp, what they saw now was a scene that struck them dumb. Swords got heavier the longer they were. Long swords, like the ones Ainz were holding, could not be wielded easily, even with weight-reducing magic. Granted, they already knew that Ainz possessed preternatural arm strength from their short time with him. But even so, they could not believe anyone could swing those greatswords with such ease. However, Ainz casually whipped them through the air like a pair of sticks. Truly, it was an awe-inspiring sight.
Momon, what kind of a man are you?
Peter breathed, as though speaking for everyone else. As a warrior himself, he immediately knew just how strong one's arms would have to be to pull off a stunt like that. His shock was because he had no idea how long Momon had trained to reach that level of ability. Although he had always felt that Momon was on a different level from himself, being confronted with the truth made his legs tremble uncontrollably. Even the unintelligent goblins were terrified by the sight of Ainz, their legs slowing from their mad dash as they went around him to go for Peter and the others. Only the ogres, who were too stupid to be afraid and who were supremely confident in their brawn, continued heading toward Ainz. As they closed in on him, the ogres raised their clubs. Ainz's greatswords might have been huge, but the ogres, with their massive great clubs, had a longer reach than him. But just as the ogres were about to make their move, Ainz stepped forward. His movements were as swift as the wind. And then, faster than that, he swung the greatsword in his right hand. The flashing blade left a silvery afterimage in its wake as it cleaved through the air. The stroke was an astounding one. It raised goosebumps on the onlookers' skin. Even though the blade was not aimed at them, they could not help but feel that death stood by their side. It was over in a single blow. Ainz turned his gaze from the ogre in front of him, seeking another target. As though waiting for Ainz to look away, the upper body of the ogre slid off and fell wetly to the ground, leaving its motionless lower body still standing. Yet the spray of blood and organs and the vile stench that hung in the air proved that this was not an illusion. The ogre had been cut diagonally in half. The battle was still on, but both sides were motionless. They were staring at this awesome sight. It was slain in a single blow. Not even an ogre's mighty physique could save it from the fate of being cut in two.
Absolutely incredible. This is beyond Mithril or Calcum. No, could he be adamantite?
Cleaving a foe into two parts. This was not an impossible feat of arms. A rare few exponents of swordsmanship, or those bearing powerful magic weapons, might be able to do it. However, it was common sense that one could not use one's full strength when wielding a two-handed greatsword with one hand. After all, two-handed weapons were, as the name implied, intended to be wielded with both hands, using the weight of the weapon and the leverage of its length to do damage. They were not intended to be wielded by arm strength alone. Therefore, from Ainz's movements, the possibility existed that his sword might be enchanted with magic beyond the ken of normal magic items, or that Ainz with one hand was stronger than a regular warrior with both arms, or both. In the face of this jaw-dropping sight, the ogres unconsciously stopped moving and began backing off with looks of fear on their faces. Ainz strode forth, shrinking the distance between himself and the ogres.
What's wrong? Not coming?
His casual, relaxed words resounded through the battlefield. These simple words filled the ogres with fear. After all, they had seen with their own eyes the vast disparity between their own power and Ainz's. On his part, Ainz closed the gap to the ogres with startling speed. His movements were swift, with a speed that someone wearing a suit of full-plate armor should not have possessed. With a cry that sounded like a cross between a wail of despair and a shout, the ogre before him raised his great club to smite the oncoming Ainz. However, everyone here knew in their guts that the ogre was far, far too slow. As Ainz closed in, he swung the greatsword in his left hand horizontally. The ogre's upper body spun through the air, landing some distance away from the rest of its body. This time, it had been transversely bisected.
So Momon, are you a monster?
As yet another breathtaking scene unfolded before their eyes, none of them could bring themselves to refute Dain's words.
As for the rest of you...
Ainz stepped forward. The ugly faces of the ogres froze, and they retreated even faster. The goblins circled around the ogres and Ainz's defensive line to attack Peter and the others. The Swords of Darkness, stunned by the sights they had just seen, managed to react to the assault and began moving. Peter raised his broadsword and large shield, prepared to take on the 10 or so goblins headed toward him. He charged forward, sending a goblin's head flying into the air. And then Peter evaded the arterial spray before entering melee with the other goblins.
Take this!
The yellow-toothed goblins responded with a garbled cry that was hard on the ears. Peter skillfully blocked the goblin's club with his shield, while his magically reinforced armor took the rest of the hits with a low-pitched sound.
Magic arrow!
2 magic missiles struck the goblin trying to attack Peter from behind. It collapsed like its strings had been cut. Half of the goblins surrounding Peter rushed the other 3 adventurers, but none of the goblins dared attack Narborough, who stood beside the storm of death called Ainz. Lukrut put down his composite longbow and drew a short sword from his waist. Together with Dain, who wielded a mace, the 2 of them ran to Nina and placed their backs against his. Lukrut and Dain were matched against 5 goblins, and the odds were roughly even. Although the goblins were being eliminated one by one, it was still very time-consuming under the present circumstances. Lukrut's face was a mask of pain as he endured the pain coming from his arm. It had been struck by a goblin's club as he thrust his short sword into the gaps of his opponent's leather armor. Dine had taken several hits as well, and as a result, his movements slowed down, but he was not in any mortal danger. Nfirea surveyed the battlefield anxiously, with an eye toward conserving his spells. Although some of the ogres were immobilized by magic, he might have to deal with them if the situation changed. As for Peter, he was engaged in a fierce battle with 6 goblins, and the struggle went back and forth several times. The reason why they had not been overwhelmed by 11 goblins was because the goblins' charge had been blunted. After seeing Ainz's preternatural ability to kill ogres in one blow, the goblins' morale plummeted, and they could not make up their mind whether to flee or fight. Then, Ainz swung his sword in a grand, sweeping arc, as though announcing his intent to utterly demoralize the goblins. As the sound of the displaced air swept into everyone's ears, they could hear the sound of a heavy weight hitting the ground. It was soon followed by 2 more such sounds. Just as everyone had expected, the number of ogre corpses steadily increased. There were 2 more ogres struggling to hold on to life. One of them was pinned down by the grass, while the other was quaking in fear before Ainz. Ainz's helmet turned to face the last ogre who was still opposing him. The ogre seemed to sense Ainz's expression through the slits of his closed helm, because it made a strange cry before turning to flee, discarding its great club as it ran for the forest. It was moving faster than when it charged, but there was no escape for it.
Nabe, do it.
As the merciless order rang through the air, Narbarrel, who had been standing by behind Ainz, nodded slightly.
Lightning.
The electrical discharge thundered through the air as it leapt forth, and the stroke of lightning cleanly pierced the fleeing ogre's body. It even went through the ogre behind it, the one which had been entangled by Dine's spell. That single spell put to rest 2 ogres. The goblins who had watched this scene in stunned silence began fleeing as they screamed in terror. However, Peter was too fast for them, and the demoralized goblins were no threat to him. The adventurers felled the goblins 2 and 3 at a time. In addition, Nfirea, no longer bound to conserve mana, began throwing attack spells into the fray. In the blink of an eye, the goblins had been crushed, with no survivors. Amidst the vile corpse stench that hung in the air, Dine healed Lukrut's and Peter's wounds with the spell Light Healing. With nothing else to do, Nfirea began cutting off the goblins' ears with a dagger. They would be paid for turning in the ears to the guild. Of course, adventurers did not claim their bounty with monsters' ears alone. Rather, they submitted different body parts as appropriate for different types of monsters. However, goblins and ogres were demi-humans, so for the most part, ears were used in their case. Nfirea cut the ears off with practiced ease, and then he noticed that Ainz and Narbarrel were looking around the place where most of the ogres had died. They seemed to be searching for something.
What's wrong?
After hearing Ninia's question, Ainz lifted his head and replied,
I was just thinking. Do these monsters drop items? In particular, crystals or the like?
Crystals? I've never heard of ogres carrying anything like crystals.
I see. I was just wondering if they carried treasure.
I'd be jumping for joy if ogres had treasure too.
Nfirea replied as he removed the ogre's ears with practiced movements.
Still, you're amazing, Mr. Momon. I knew you were a warrior who was proud of his abilities, but I didn't think you'd be that amazing.
As they heard Ninia's words, the other 3 adventurers who had finished with their healing magic began saying to Ainz,
That was great! I'm in awe of you, as a fellow warrior. How did you train up your arms like that?
I thought you were quite wealthy from the way you were accompanied by Ms. Nabe, but What kind of swords are those? I've never seen such valuable-looking swords before.
I know now that what you said to the guild was not a bluff. Truly, you're on par with the kingdom's mightiest warrior.
Narberl held her nose high as she watched from the side. However, Ainz was frantically waving his hands about.
Oh, there's no need to say that. It was nothing much.
Nothing much.
Peter and friends smiled bitterly.
After that battle, I finally understand what they mean by always someone better.
I'm sure you'll all be able to surpass me with ease one day.
Ainz's reply made the smiles on the faces of the Swords of Darkness even more bitter. Peter and the others had worked hard to make themselves stronger, and they had carefully saved all their earnings, using them to strengthen themselves. They could get along because they all shared the same goal. However, even when they looked back on all the effort they had put in since becoming adventurers, none of them could imagine themselves on Ainz's level. To the Swords of Darkness, Ainz stood upon a pinnacle that almost nobody could reach. This person traveling with them would someday become a hero whose name would be known to all. He would become a great person that would stand atop all other adventurers. Everyone was certain of that. Although it was some time from dusk, the adventurers were already setting up camp. Ainz took the wooden poles handed to him by the others and directed them around the campsite. Because they had to shelter a horse and wagon, the campsite in question was around 20 meters on each side and covered a fairly large area. The poles went into 4 points around the campsite, and then thin, blackened ropes were tied around the poles, forming a perimeter. Finally, they tied a knot in one of the ropes and pulled it over to their tents, where they attached a big bell to it. This was their alarm system. As Ainz was driving the poles into the ground, Narberl came around.
Narberl should have some work to do. Maybe she's finished? But if that man Lukrut made her mad again, all I can do is gently reprimand her.
With those thoughts in mind, Ainz turned around. As he did, Narberl spoke in a low voice that suggested that she was holding back feelings of anger.
They should not be troubling you with work like this, Mr. Mamon.
Ainz sighed in relief as he learned the reason for her anger. He looked around and then quietly replied,
Everyone's working together to pitch camp. It would be odd if I was the only one not doing anything, no?
Have they not seen your extraordinary fighting skill? People should do what they are suited for, so this sort of work should be left to weaklings like them.
Don't say that. Listen, we need to establish ourselves as powerful individuals, but we mustn't project an image of arrogance while we do it. You need to check yourself a little too.
Narberl nodded to show that she understood, but her displeasure was evident on her face. She was only going along with this because it was an express order from Ainz himself. He could tell that her loyalty was enough to overcome her unhappiness. On the other hand, the thought that this might cause a slip-up at an inopportune time made Ainz feel uneasy. The truth was that Ainz was having a lot of fun with these outdoor activities. After all, this was something he could not experience in the virtual world of Yggdrasil, let alone in real life, and thus it was filled with novelty. Although the whole thing had taken too much time, it also reminded Ainz of the adventures he had exploring unknown places in Yggdrasil.
If I was the only one who came to this new world without the whole of Nazarick with me, I'd probably have gone traveling without a second thought.
The undead did not need to eat, drink, or breathe. That being the case, they could climb high mountains with their own 2 legs, or walk into the ocean depths. He would have enjoyed himself by witnessing the unknown vistas of the world. However, now that his comrades' treasures, his loyal subordinates, were here, Ainz felt that he should repay their loyalty by ruling Nazarick well. Ainz cast his thoughts aside and calmly returned to his work. After hammering the 4 wooden poles into the ground, he tied the rope around them and then raised the tent over it.
Thanks for your hard work.
Think nothing of it.
Lukrut was inside the tent, and he thanked Ainz without looking at him. It was kind of rude, but it was not as though he was slacking off either. He had been digging a hole for a stove ever since just now. The magic caster, Nfirea, was pacing about the surroundings, incanting a spell as he went. This was an alarm spell, and as the name suggested, it was a spell of warning that would trigger if anything trespassed on their camp. Though it had a small area of effect, it was still useful just in case. This spell, which did not exist in Yggdrasil, made Ainz narrow his eyes. Although he had handed the task of learning about unknown magic to other people, as a magic caster, he still felt the desire to know about spells he had never seen before. The magic Nfirea used was a spell of the arcane type, like the kind that Ainz could cast. In addition, it looked very similar to an Yggdrasil spell. Ainz had used a racial skill called Dark Wisdom to perform a rite which increased the number of spells he knew.
Could I learn spells that weren't in Yggdrasil by making a life sacrifice? Or is there another way? There's so many things I know nothing about.
As Nfirea realized Ainz was staring at himself, he smiled and drew closer to Ainz.
Ah, there's no need to watch me so intently. It must be pretty boring, right?
Well, I'm curious about magic. I'm interested in what you're doing, Mr. Nfirea.
No way. I'm probably far below Miss Nabe, aren't I?
It's because you know spells that Nabe doesn't.
Narbril nodded slightly, but Ainz noticed from the corner of his eye that the look on her face was more of jealousy than regret.
I'd like to cast spells like you, Mr. Nfirea.
You're greedy, Mr. Momon. To think you'd want spell-casting ability even though your swordsmanship is so amazing. No, I should say that you're being an adventurer, right?
Magic doesn't seem like the sort of thing you can learn in 1 or 2 days. Well, you need to connect to the world, but only people with the appropriate talent can do it. If not, you'll need to take a long time to experience it.
Those words came from Lukrut, who had cut in without turning to look from where he was setting up the campfire. Ninia's face turned serious.
Mr. Momon, I think you have that talent. You're different from other people. Kind of like you're not human at all.
Ainz's non-existent heart seemed to lurch in his chest. Ainz wondered if Nfirea had sensed that he was undead. Although he had already veiled himself in illusions and counter-detection spells, Nfirea might have seen through Ainz with an unknown spell, or some other special ability. Therefore, Ainz asked Nfirea,
Is that so? I feel that I am strong, but not inhumanly so. You've seen my face as well, so wouldn't you think that as well?
I'm not talking about appearances. It's just that, after seeing you fight, you're clearly beyond the realm of humanity. Taking out an ogre in one blow? As I thought. A real man gets on by strength, not looks. And you've got a beauty like Ms. Nabe with you.
Upon closer consideration, Lukrut seemed to be saying that the illusionary face which Ainz showed them was an ugly one. However, when he thought about the looks of everyone he had met so far, Ainz could only sit down and accept his opinion.
There's too many handsome men and beautiful women in this world. Even the passers-by look attractive. After coming here, I've got a worse opinion of my own looks.
Appearances aside, Lukrut has a point. A hero is someone who surpasses the realm of human possibility. I get that feeling from you too.
No, that's too much. I wouldn't dare claim to be any sort of hero, even if it was to be polite.
As Ainz feigned embarrassment while answering Nfirea, he resisted the urge to sigh in relief.
If it's convenient for you, would you like to meet my master? My master's talent lies in detecting an individual's magical power. If you were born with magical potential, my master should be able to sense it. When it comes to arcane magic casters, my master can even differentiate between them by the tiers of magic which they can cast.
I've been meaning to ask for a while. Is that talent the same as the one possessed by the Empire's head magician?
Yes, it's the same talent.
Ainz could not let information like this slip through his hands. He had to continue asking about it.
What is this ability like?
According to my master, we magic casters radiate something like an aura from our bodies. The more adept one becomes in magic, the stronger this aura becomes. Master has the ability to see these auras.
Oh.
Ainz immediately suppressed a quiet surprise in his tone, and in order to cover it up, promptly responded in a more normal tone.
This was how my master gathered up talented children and trained them in magic. I was recruited by my master in that way.
Ainz nodded and cursed silently in his heart.
There's people with abilities like that? This could be troublesome.
Then, if I wanted to learn how to cast spells, where should I begin?
For starters, you need a proper teacher.
And how about becoming your disciple, Mr. Dina?
You should probably find someone more skilled than myself. However, schools in the kingdom are very exclusive, and people without connections can't join the guilds that handle magic. Even if you could join, most of the recruits would be immature kids. It would be very difficult for someone of your age to get in without some kind of special networking, Mr. Momon. On that note, the Empire has a full-fledged magical academy, and the theocracy has a very high standard for magical education as well, though that's for divine magic.
I see. So if I entered the Empire's magical academy, I could learn magic.
That would be pretty difficult. The academy is an educational institution run by the government, so I think you'd have to be a citizen of the Empire to study there.
Is that so?
And as for becoming my disciple, though I must apologize for it, I must refuse. I have something I want to do, and I don't have the free time to train people.
Nina's face went grim. There were hints of hostility amidst the negative emotion there.
Maybe I shouldn't pry too deeply. There's no merit to doing so.
Just as Ainz came to that conclusion, Lukrut interrupted his train of thought with casual words.
Oi! Sorry to interrupt your conversation, but dinner's ready. Do you mind calling those three back?
Let me go, Mr. Momon.
Huh? Ms. Nabe, you're going off? Why not stay with me and make a dinner filled with love?
Unless you want me to pour boiling oil down your throat so you can't utter such nonsense again.
Enough. Nabe, let's go together.
Yes, understood.
After thanking Nina, Ainz approached the two people working quietly on the ground, a short distance from the tent. Peter and Dine were focused on caring for their weapons. They oiled them to prevent rust from building up, inspected them carefully to see if they were bent, and so on. There were fresh dents on their armor, and cracks on their swords from where they had clashed with the goblins' weapons. Naturally, these defects had to be remedied as soon as possible, and the two of them were so focused that Ainz did not know whether he should call out to them. After telling them that dinner was ready, he informed Nfirea about the matter at the place where the wagon was tied up, a short distance away. The sun touched the horizon, and the group had their dinner against the ruby radiance of its dying light. In their hands, they held bowls of thick stew, flavored with bacon bits, as well as toasted bread, dried figs, walnuts, and other nuts. This was today's dinner. Ainz looked at the bowl of stew in his hands. It appeared to be very salty. He could not feel the heat of the bowl through his metal gauntlets, but judging from the way everyone else was digging into it with big mouthfuls and not blowing on it to cool it down, it should have been just the right temperature.
Now then, what should I do?
Ainz was undead, and he could not eat with this body of his. In addition, he had disguised his appearance with an illusion. If he tried to drink soup with his skeletal mouth and body, it would probably spill out right away. He could not let the others see that, no matter what. This was unknown food and drink from an unknown world. Though the dishes before him were plain fare, Ainz felt that it was a shame to not be able to enjoy them. Though he no longer had a need or desire to eat, he was unhappy with the fact that he could not consume the delicious-looking food that piqued his curiosity. For the first time since he had come to this world, he regretted his undead body.
Ah, is there something you're scared of eating?
Lukrut asked, as he noted that Ainz had not touched his food.
No, it's just a personal matter.
Is that so? Then you don't need to force yourself, alright? Although, we're eating now. So, could you take off your helmet?
It's a religious reason. I can't eat with more than 4 people on a day when I take life.
Oh, that's an unusual faith you follow, Sir Momon. Still, the world is large, and religions like that aren't particularly strange.
The doubt in their eyes faded away once they learned that it had something to do with religion. It seems religions in this world are a complicated matter. As Ainz thought that, he gave silent thanks to the gods he did not believe in for somehow letting him muddle through this. Then, he asked Peter,
I recall your team name is Swords of Darkness, but I don't see a black blade among you.
On the topic of the group's weapons, Peter used a longsword with an ordinary enchantment. Lukrut favored the bow and arrow, Dine used a mace, and Nina used a staff. Peter's sword and Lukrut's backup short sword were both blades, but neither of them had a color that was anywhere close to dark. There was a technique to tint metal a different color by depositing a special powder on its surface, so creating a black sword was not a difficult task. Rather, it seemed odd that none of them bore a blade of that color.
So it's that kind of question.
Lukrut smiled bitterly, as though someone had brought up an embarrassing memory. Ninia's face flushed bright red, a distinctly different color from the fire's glow.
They're the swords of Ninia's dreams.
Come on, that's enough. I was just being childish.
That's nothing to feel bad about. It's important to have a great dream.
Give me a break, Dine. I'm serious.
Good-natured laughter accompanied Ninia's teasing by the other Swords of Darkness. Nina, on the other hand, was so embarrassed that he was looking for a hole to crawl into. It would seem the name Swords of Darkness contained a secret that only its members knew.
Well, the name Swords of Darkness refers to the swords borne by one of the 13 heroes.
The smiling Peter stopped there, seemingly unwilling to go any further.
Even if he says that, I'm not sure what's going on. Still, I know that the 13 heroes were the superheroes who destroyed the demon gods, who were rampaging across the world 200 years ago. If I'm ignorant about these heroes and their gear, would it be embarrassing? Or should I just say that I know?
Just as Ainz was agonizing over this issue, Narbarrel cut in from a side.
What are they?
Ainz struck a victory pose in his heart, but surprise crossed the faces of the members of Swords of Darkness. Just about anyone would be shocked that someone knew nothing about the magic weapons for which the team was named.
Miss Nabe, you didn't know? Well, it's not as though it's unforgivable.
The Swords of Darkness belonged to the man known as Black Knight. It was one of the 4 swords he possessed. There was the demonic blade, Kiliairum, which could emit dark energy. The blade of Rot, Croctobol, which infected wounds that would not heal. The fatal blade, Sphize, which would kill with the merest scratch. As well as the evil blade, Hymilius, whose powers are unknown.
He was one of the 13 heroes, but because people thought he had demonic ancestry, he ended up being more of an anti-hero instead. Therefore, his origins were covered up in the saga of the 13 heroes, though I've heard that he was a very powerful person.
Oh.
Everyone smiled bitterly at Narbarrel's unenthusiastic reply. However, Ainz tilted his head in pensive musing. Those abilities seemed familiar. After careful thought, the images of a vampire appeared in his mind. Those special abilities were similar to the skills possessed by Shaltir Bloodfallen, who had levels in the Cursed Knight class. Cursed Knights had the backstory of being corrupted cleric knights who had been cursed, and they were considered to be a very strong class in Yggdrasil. However, they had a lot of drawbacks, so they were not very popular. Among the skills cursed knights could learn was the ability to release waves of darkness, inflict cursed wounds which could not be healed by low-level healing spells, instant death curses, and so on. Ainz narrowed his illusory eyes under his helmet. This was not a coincidence. While the Swords of Darkness might be weapons with powers similar to those of a cursed knight, it was more likely that the hero himself was a cursed knight. If that were the case, when one considered the prerequisites to become a cursed knight, it was certain that this Black Knight was at least level 60. No, if one considered that he had to actually learn all those skills as well, he would have to be at least level 70. It would seem the demon gods were evenly matched against heroes like that, so it was a reasonable hypothesis that their levels were roughly the same. However, Nigun of the Sunlight Scripture said that the Dominion authority which he summoned could defeat a demon god. So it would seem that the demon gods and the heroes were not on the same level. After comparing this new information with what he already knew, it seemed logical that the demon gods were not all equally powerful. However, the only way to know for sure would be to meet that hero, or obtain that sword. As Ainz pondered this, the rest of the group continued talking. Ainz hurriedly shifted his attention to their conversation. It would be a shame to miss out on a chance to learn something, just because he was distracted.
There's a lot of legends about the weapons out there, but some of them have been proven to exist. The thing is that the existence of the Swords of Darkness is still a mystery.
Ah, there's someone out there who possesses one of the Swords of Darkness.
After Nfirea calmly dropped that bombshell, the Swords of Darkness turned on him.
What? Really? So that means there's only 3 left?
Oh, that means we won't be able to distribute them evenly to everyone now.
Nfirea gingerly replied,
About that. The person who owns that sword is the leader of the adventuring party called Blue Rose.
Adventures like that? Then it can't be helped.
That's true. Still, there's 3 of them left. Let's work hard so we can be strong enough to take them into possession.
Indeed, since one of them is the real deal, that means that the other 3 exist as well. I hope these swords are hidden in a place that nobody's discovered until we find them.
Ninya, you best write it down in your diary so you don't forget.
I know. I'll write it down for sure. However, the stuff in there is personal, so shouldn't you memorize it instead?
It's better to have a hard copy.
Is that the problem, Dine?
Still, we have that.
What is that?
This, Mr. Momon.
Peter took out a dagger with 4 jewels embedded into its scabbard. It had a black blade.
Before we discovered the real thing, I planned to use this as the party symbol.
Still, though, Blade of Darkness would work just as well as Swords of Darkness, right? Come to think of it, it's not as though it's a fake. It'll make the perfect symbol for our group.
Oh, Lukrut's making sense for once.
The adventurers laughed, radiating an air of camaraderie. Ainz was affected by this as well, and smiled in response. They probably felt the same way about that dagger, as Ainz did about the staff which represented the guild. The dinner conversation continued, and Swords of Darkness, having the advantage of numbers, tossed questions out at Ainz, Narberl, and Nfirea. Ainz responded as best as he could, but he still felt a barrier separating him from Swords of Darkness. This was because Ainz lacked knowledge about this world, and he could not engage too fully, lest his ignorance be revealed. Thus, Ainz kept quiet about things he did not know, which in turn led to him drawing even further away from the adventurers in a vicious cycle. Though the adventurers tried to chat up Narberl, all she did was respond with the verbal equivalent of a home run, leaving them with no way to respond. Eventually, they slowly stopped trying to speak to her. Nfirea, on the other hand, was handling this quite well. As a native of this world, he got along better with the others than Ainz. He was observant and could follow the adventurers' discussion well.
I had friends like these once.
These childish thoughts, almost like a tantrum, ran through Ainz's head as he watched the others chatting happily in the campfire's light. They seemed very close to each other, but that was only to be expected of a group of comrades who trod the edge of life and death in each other's company. Nfirea had a look of envy on his face as he looked upon them. Ainz recalled his friends from the past, and under his helmet, he quietly ground his teeth in jealousy. Once, he had been just like them.
Well, you seem like a chummy bunch. Are all adventurers like that?
I should think so. After all, adventurers are colleagues who face death together. It'd be dangerous if they didn't understand each other and what they planned to do. So, somewhere along the way, adventurers end up being quite close to each other.
Indeed. After all, we don't have any women on our team. I heard parties with women tend to have a lot of arguments.
Yeah.
With an indecipherable smile, Nina continued.
And if there were, Lukrut would be the first to raise questions. After all, our group has a very clear objective, right?
Peter and the others nodded in unison.
Just like that. It feels completely different when everyone is of one mind.
Moment. Were you in an adventuring party before?
Ainz did not know how to answer Nfirea's question. But right now, he had no need to make up some strange excuse to cover it up.
We probably didn't count as adventurers.
He could not help but take a somber tone as he thought about his past friends. After all, he still had emotions, even though his body was undead, and his friends were the people that Ainz treasured the most. Sensing Ainz's difficulty in answering, nobody pursued the matter, and silence fell upon the group. Amidst this quiet, so deep and so total that it felt like they were the only people in the world, Ainz unconsciously raised his head and looked into the star-studded night sky.
When I was still a weakling, a paladin of pure white with sword and shield in hand saved me. Through him, I met 4 more comrades, and so we formed a team that numbered 6 people, including myself. In addition, after that, we met 3 more weak people like ourselves, and we ended up as a team of 9 people.
Someone exclaimed quietly, amidst the crackling of the campfire. Ainz was not bothered, and he continued recounting the story of the original 9 members of what would become Ainz Ooal Gown.
They were all excellent companions. A paladin, a swordmaster, a priest, and a thief. A two-sword thief. A sorcerer, a chef, a blacksmith. They were all irreplaceable friends. We had countless adventures together, and until now, I still haven't been able to forget these days.
Through them, he had learned the meaning of friendship. He had once thought he would have been ignored in Yggdrasil, like in the real world. But unlike reality, they ended up being the best of friends, who would extend a helping hand to each other at any time. And so, as the number of group members steadily increased, they shared their joys and their sorrows together. Therefore, the guild called Ainz Ooal Gown was a treasure to Ainz. He would ensure its brilliance was never diminished, even if he had to discard or destroy everything to do so.
I'm sure you'll find companions like them again someday.
That day will never come!
In response to Nina's comforting words, Ainz snapped. The hostility in Ainz's tone startled everyone, even himself. Alarmed by what he had said, Ainz slowly rose to his feet.
Forgive me. Nabe, I'll have my dinner over there.
And I shall go too.
Although Ainz noticed the depressed look on Nina's face, Ainz did not intend to say anything more to him. Perhaps a simple, "I'm not bothered by it," would have sufficed.
The two of them had their dinner in the corner of the roped-off campsite area. The ones who stayed behind discussed the pair which had left. It was only to be expected, given what the absent people had accomplished today. Then the conversation grew to a halt, and silence descended upon the group. The campfire crackled and spat glowing embers which danced into the sky. As Nfirea watched the glowing traces vanish into the air, he muttered in a self-chastising tone.
I think I said something I shouldn't have.
It seems like something happened in their past.
Dine nodded deeply, and then Peter continued.
I guess they were all wiped out. I've seen that sort of reaction from people who lost their friends in battle.
That must be hard to bear. Even if we are used to walking on the edge of death together, losing a friend is still...
That's right, Lukrut. The words spoken just now were not the best that could have been said.
Well, what's said cannot be unsaid. Therefore, we need to do something that makes him change his mind about those words.
Nfirea looked quite depressed as he replied, and then he quietly continued.
I know what it's like to lose someone. So why didn't I put myself into his shoes?
However, nobody responded to him. The campfire's logs crackled loudly and spat embers amidst the silence. In an attempt to lighten the heaviness in the air, Nfirea gingerly spoke.
Mr. Momon's fighting was really spectacular.
As though waiting for those words, Peter immediately added,
Yeah, I didn't think it would be so amazing. He cut an ogre clean in two.
That was seriously over the top.
Beating an ogre in one blow is amazing in its own right. But how good do you have to be to cleave it in half?
Nfirea was a young man who was famous for his innate talent, as well as an excellent magic caster. Although he might well shake the world with his abilities, it was difficult for him to understand the full extent of Ainz's prowess without another warrior for comparison.
Normally, great swords are used in hacking fashion, but he employed them in slashing method. Usually when you use a greatsword one-handed, it would be very difficult to sever the limbs of an enemy large as an ogre. But it would seem there's an exception to that now.
Nfirea gasped as he heard Peter's words. Peter felt that Nfirea was not sufficiently awed, and decided to name someone he might be more familiar with.
Honestly speaking, I think Mr. Momon is on the same level as the kingdom's warrior captain.
Nfirea's eyes widened in astonishment. He finally understood what the Swords of Darkness thought of Ainz's abilities.
He could be an adamantite-ranked adventurer. Those people who are the highest-ranked adventurers, living legends, in other words, the mightiest human beings?
Indeed,
Peter replied as he nodded gently. Nfirea looked around at the other members of the Swords of Darkness, who were also nodding in approval. He was dumbfounded. Adamantite-ranked adventurers possessed guild plates made of adamantite, a rare magical material which was the hardest metal known to man. If adventurers and their numbers formed a pyramid, then adamantite-ranked adventurers would occupy the peak, and would be correspondingly scarce. Both the kingdom and the empire only boasted 2 teams of adamantite-ranked adventurers each. Their abilities were at the zenith of human potential. One might even call them heroes, and Momon was a person who could rival them.
That's incredible.
One could hear the utter amazement in those words.
At first, the first time I saw Mr. Momon dressed in a suit of full, stylish plate armor, while wearing the copper plate belonging to the lowest of adventurers, I felt pretty jealous. But now that I've seen that he has the skills to match his look, there's nothing more I can say. Mr. Momon's abilities are worthy of his full plate. I'm kinda jealous of how strong he is.
Peter the warrior did not wear full plate. Instead, he sported a suit of banded armor, which was somewhat less protective. This was not by personal preference. Rather, it was the best body armor he could afford with his limited resources.
Don't worry about it. I'm sure you'll be able to buy a suit of full plate soon, Peter.
Indeed, you should work hard towards that goal. Really, you should be glad that you're fortunate enough to be able to witness an example of what it's like to be at the top.
Ninia's right. All you need to do is work hard and reach the target of Mr. Momon. We'll support you too. So, let's move forward together.
That's right. Slowly but surely your hard work will pay off. I'm sure that Sir Momon must have trained even longer than you did.
Dine's words awoke doubts in Nfirea's heart.
Have you seen what Mr. Momon looks like under his helmet?
Ainz had never removed his helm since meeting Nfirea, not even while eating. How he drank was also a mystery.
Yes, we have. He looks like an average person, though not one from nearby. He and Miss Nabe have black hair and black eyes.
Is that so? Did he say which country he was from?
The Swords of Darkness looked at each other, and they suddenly realized that Nfirea seemed very interested in that topic.
Well, he didn't elaborate much on that.
Really now? No. I was just thinking that if he came from a different country, he'd use different potions than what was available in the surrounding region. It's just my curiosity as a herbalist talking.
I see. Well, he does seem to be from the same place as Ms. Nabe, yet their looks are worlds apart. He doesn't look handsome at all. Would anyone like people like that?
Well, he doesn't look like much, but his strength, I'm sure there must be countless girls throwing themselves at him.
Powerful individuals were popular. This was because this world had monsters in it, and humans were on the bottom end of the power curve. As a result, the innate instincts of women made them desire strong males.
Don't tell me my feelings will never bear fruit.
Nah, it's impossible. I don't think there was even a flower to begin with.
Nina replied with a bitter smile as he recalled Narbaral's reaction.
Utter nonsense. In any case, the important thing is to keep pushing, and pushing. Eagerness is the key. Besides, she's a super hot girl, right? If she's just a little bit nicer to me, it'll mean I've won at life.
While she does look very pretty, I don't think she would.
Halfway through his somber reply, Dine noticed that Nfirea had a bitter look on his face.
Mr. Nfirea, is something wrong?
No. It's nothing.
Oh?
Lukrut grinned lewdly.
What? You're in love with Miss Nabe?
Of course not!
Nfirea retorted with unnecessary loudness. From the intensity of his reaction, Peter sensed that they should not keep pressing him. Instead, he said,
Lukrut, you're being rude. Think before you talk.
Nfirea looked uncomfortable, and he was not sure how to respond to Lukrut's sincere apology.
No, it's not like that. Well, I'm just a little uneasy. Would Mr. Momon really be that popular?
Looks aside, he'd be a hit just going on his strength alone. Plus, he looks pretty wealthy, given the armor he wears and the swords he carries.
Nfirea's face was cast in shadow. With the tone of a senior speaking to a junior, Peter carefully asked,
Is something the matter?
Nfirea wanted to speak, but cut himself off halfway. The effect repeated itself over and over again, making him look quite like a goldfish. However, Peter and the others did not press him. There was no need to force an answer out of him if he did not want to talk about it. Soon, however, Nfirea made up his mind and finally managed to speak.
It's because I don't want to let the person I like in Carne Village fall in love with Mr. Momon.
The Swords of Darkness deftly picked up on the hidden message within those words, and then smiled warmly.
All right then, young man. Big bro Lukrut here will teach you his amazing technique.
Peter punched Lukrut, drawing a queer howl from the latter. The Swords of Darkness paid no heed to the look of agony on Lukrut's face, and made to comfort the stunned Nfirea. Lit by the radiance of the campfire, the boy finally smiled.
At the same time, a thrust went through the steel helmet, along with the forehead beneath it. The body shook violently, and then collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The metal armor clanged loudly in the night. He prayed that someone would hear the sound, but nobody would come to Irantel's beggars' district, which had practically been abandoned by the residents. That was why the client had arranged to meet them here after all. The man glared at the young woman before him. However, it was clear that he was just putting on a brave front. He had lost the will to fight after seeing the woman casually kill 3 of his fellows. The young woman who had murdered his colleagues flicked her blood-stained stilettos. The ichor scattered in all directions, and the blades recovered their cold shine.
And then there was one.
The woman revealed her canines with a predatory grin.
Why are you doing this?
He knew it was a stupid question, but the man had no idea why this was happening to him. These men were the dropouts among adventurers. The term for them was workers, or dusk workers. They took on jobs which were borderline, or sometimes outright, illegal. This might have been the result of some sort of grudge, but he had never worked in this city before. Neither had he seen this girl before.
Why did I do this? Well now, I just wanted you.
The man could not understand what the girl was talking about. He blinked several times and then asked,
What do you mean?
That famous herbalist's grandson isn't at home. I wanted someone to keep an eye on them for me and see when they got back. I can't be bothered with such troublesome things.
Then all you needed to do was ask. Weren't you planning to do that in the first place?
Workers like themselves would gladly take illegal jobs, so he had no idea why this girl was slaughtering them.
No. You might have betrayed me.
We don't betray anyone as long as we get paid.
Then how about this? I like killing people. I love it. I'm absolutely crazy about it. And I like torture too.
The young woman added with a giggle. After hearing this nonsensical reply, the man's face hardened and he said,
What the hell? Why are you so insane?
Why?
The young woman's face changed. The joking, teasing tone from just now was gone.
I wonder why. Perhaps it was because my job involved killing lots of people. Maybe it was because I was constantly compared to my amazing big brother. How they loved him instead of me. Or how I was raped constantly before I became strong. Because my friends died in front of me. Or maybe it was because I messed up and got captured and tortured for several days. He to choke Pear's hurt, you know.
It seemed as though there was only a little girl before him. But in the blink of an eye, a smile bloomed on the woman's face.
Just kidding. I was making it all up. It's a lie. Never happened to me. Still, even if you knew, would it change anything? I'm this way because things piled up. Speaking of which, I need to thank Kaji for helping me suss out all this info. I'm so glad I can meet you all right away. You should know how long it takes to find help.
The girl released her stilettos, which were pulled down by gravity, and sank into the ground. Judging by their abnormal sharpness, they must have been made of something other than simple steel.
This is orichalcum. More precisely, it's orichalcum alloyed over mithril. Pretty good stuff.
The fact that she bore such exotic weaponry was a sign of the woman's prowess. In other words, he had no chance of victory.
Time for the next step. I can't use you if you're heavily wounded, but Kaji can heal you with divine magic no matter how much I hurt you. Which means I get to enjoy torturing you as much as I like. No.
As she uttered those bone-chilling words, she drew another pair of stilettos from under her robe.
These should be good. Sorry if I miss.
It was adorable, the way she stuck her tongue out at him. However, her filthy blackened heart was visible for all to see. The man turned his back to her and ran. Although he heard an exaggerated gasp of surprise from the young woman, he still ran with every ounce of strength in him. He was proud of his sense of direction, and he used it to the full as he ran through the lightless dark. However, there was a clattering noise from behind him, followed by the woman's calm voice.
Too slow.
Searing pain filled his shoulder. His first thought was that he had been stabbed by a stiletto, and then a shadow fell over his thoughts. Mind control. The man desperately tried to resist, but that only mired his consciousness further in darkness. The voice of a friend came from behind him.
Are you alright? Is the wound deep?
No, I'm fine.
The man smiled as he turned to face his friend.
Is that so? That's wonderful.
A dreadful smile bloomed on the young woman's face.
The group set out at daybreak, along a hidden path on the plains.
We'll be at Carne Village soon.
The other travelers nodded in response to Nfirea, the only person who had been to Carne Village before, barring Ainz. Apart from that, they walked on in silence. Nfirea seemed somewhat put off by that. An air of awkwardness hung between them. Ainz, who was the cause of this situation, hid his guilt underneath his helmet. Nfirea kept peeking at him, and it was getting annoying. However, this was all his fault, so he could not say anything about it. This was the result of what he had said last night. Nfirea had apologized at breakfast, and Ainz should have accepted the apology on the spot. But for some reason, he couldn't say a simple thing like, "I forgive you." Though he felt he was being petty, Ainz couldn't simply let bygones be bygones.
Because of this undead body, my mind has changed as well, huh?
After becoming undead, his strong emotions were suppressed, but the less intense ones did not vanish. The best proof for this was how long his mild anger lasted. Ainz's friends had a very important place in his heart. Though he cared deeply for them, he began to feel that it might not be good to let things go on like this. However, he couldn't bring himself to take the first step in changing the mood. It was because he could calmly deduce that the slight changes in his feelings, like those of a petulant child, that he felt anger at his own immaturity. The only one who stood out among the awkwardness was Narberl. She was so happy to not be bothered by Lukrut that she was practically humming in delight. The group advanced in silence, and they soon made it to the outskirts of Carne Village.
Ah, it seems pretty wide here. So maybe we don't have to stay in a line as we move.
Lukrut announced, seemingly with some other motive in mind. A glance to the sides revealed stretches of emerald forest around them, so the deliberate mention of being wide and open seemed somewhat suspicious. In addition, the point of being guards was that they could not lower their guard in an open area, so moving in a column like they were doing now was the wisest choice. It was just that they all knew their silent advance in a line was not due to the adventurers' sense of caution.
It's important to stay alert. Let's get to the village first.
Indeed, we need to stay on guard at all times, lest we get attacked.
Lukrut put on an "as if" expression in response to Peter and Dine's statements.
Maybe a dragon might attack us from far away.
Nfirea mumbled. Lukrut immediately shot back.
What kind of shitty plot development would that be? Logically speaking, how could such a thing happen, Nfirea?
You're right, it's impossible. The stories of dragons near Irantel are nothing more than that, stories. Although they say that in the ancient past, there was a dragon which could shake the heavens and the earth. Nobody's seen any dragons recently. Or no, I think there's a colony of frost dragons living along the Azalacia mountain range, towards the north.
They existed in the past? According to the Sunlight scripture, dragons are the mightiest beings in the world.
They boasted great physical attack and defense power, boundless stamina, and wielded numerous skills and spells. They were in a class of their own. There were countless monsters in Yggdrasil. Among their number were all sorts of named monsters, area monsters, as well as those super monsters called world-class enemies. Even a legion composed of 6 parties of 6 men each would not have much of a chance against these unimaginably powerful creatures. Apart from the devourer of the 9 worlds, there were the 8 dragons, the demon lords of the 7 sins, the 10 archangels of the Nfirea, as well as the 6 bosses known as the celestial lord of the 6th heaven, and the 5 colored Buddhas from the expansion pack Valkyrie's Downfall. There were 32 of these extraordinary monsters in total, and one could infer the dev team's love of dragons from the number of draconic entities among them.
I need to be careful if dragons exist. Dragons could live forever in Yggdrasil's backstory. So it wouldn't be a surprise to encounter dragons with mind-boggling powers.
Ah, could someone tell me the name of that dragon, which could shatter the sky and shake the earth?
Ainz was not nearly thick-skinned enough to nonchalantly ask a question of someone feuding with him, so he merely spoke in a low voice. However, that was loud enough for everyone to hear, and Nfirea jerked his head back to look. This was like a pair of quarreling lovers looking for a chance to make up. Ainz recalled a time when he had heard a pair of sweethearts talking in a coffee shop, and couldn't help but compare their words to his present situation. That said, Nfirea's expression seemed a little brighter since it was Ainz who made the first move. The Swords of Darkness and Nfirea were all smiles as well. Only Narberl remained unmoved. Come to think of it, the awkwardness in the air since this morning had hardly affected her.
I'm very sorry. I'll look it up for you when we get back into the city.
No need to get so excited about it. It's fine if you don't know. I was just looking for something to say.
However, he couldn't bring himself to utter those words.
Nfirea, could you help me find out if time permits?
Understood, Mr. Momon.
The way everyone nodded with exaggerated satisfaction made Ainz feel a little ashamed of himself. It might be different if the situation was the other way around, but he was filled with regret as the oldest one here.
Right. We're almost at Carne Village now.
This was the first cheerful thing which anyone had said since this morning, but Nfirea clammed up almost immediately. Everyone looked at the village before their eyes. It was a rustic hamlet at the edge of the forest. There was nothing strange or unusual about it, so Nfirea's silence was a mystery.
What's wrong, Nfirea? Is something the matter?
No, it's fine. Just, I don't recall seeing a sturdy fence like the one in front of us.
Really? It looks like an ordinary fence. Actually, it's kind of shabby for a frontier village fence, right? It wouldn't be a surprise that a village on the edge of the forest would have a sturdy fence to protect it against monsters, right?
You might be right, but Carne has the wise king of the forest, so they've never put up a fence before.
Everyone looked to the village. The village was surrounded by a fence as far as they could see, and the fence was made of logs, which were resilient to cutting.
How strange. Did something happen?
Ainz remained silent. In the past, he had come here as the magic caster Ainz Gon, but now he was the adventurer Momon. Nfirea cut in, a serious expression on his face.
Maybe I'm worrying too much, but I grew up in the village and I still remember life there, so there's two things I find suspicious. The first is that the fields haven't been tilled yet even at this time, and the other is that they've already harvested some of the wheat.
They looked in the direction Nfirea was pointing, and indeed part of the wheat had already been taken in. Ainz turned to the group, all of whom had uneasy faces, and said,
Gentlemen, let us handle this. Nabe, go invisible and scout the village with flying magic.
After acknowledging Ainz's instructions, Narberl turned herself invisible with magic and vanished. Shortly after, they heard the sound of flight magic being incanted, and Narberl no longer left any tracks behind her. The travelers waited on the road, and after a while, Narberl reappeared where she had left.
The villagers seemed to be moving normally around the village, and I did not sense that they were being controlled or ordered. The villagers are working on the field on the other side of the village.
Huh. Looks like I was just being paranoid.
It should be fine. Then let's move on, shall we?
Peter looked expectantly to Ainz and Nfirea, and they both replied in the affirmative. The road narrowed as they went on, and so they had to form up into a column as they approached the village's entrance. The wheat fields on either side of the road were a brilliant emerald, waving gently in the wind. The travelers looked as though they were submerged in a pool of green water. The wagon advanced with a clattering noise. Behind it, Lukrut made a noise of suspicion and studied the wheat fields closely. It wasn't yet time for the harvest, but the stalks were over 70 centimeters high, and they were as impenetrable as the ocean's depths.
What's wrong?
Nfirea asked from his place at the back.
Oh, nothing. Maybe I was thinking too much.
Lukrut tilted his head in bafflement, then quickened his pace, drawing closer to Peter. Nina looked in the same direction, and then opened up his steps once he made sure there was no other movements.
I hope the villagers can tend their fields properly. This seems terribly wasteful.
The wheat fields spilled over onto the road that led to the village, like the sea swallowing up the land. They wanted to cut down the stalks to ensure stable footing, but if they did that, problems would result in the future. Peter walked at the head of the group, and because his armor touched the wheat stalks, it was soon covered in wheat grains, feeling that something was wrong. This was a warning born from his instincts, which had been honed through countless brushes with death. Would the green grains fall off so easily? Driven by instinct, he looked back into the wheat fields and saw a pair of eyes staring at them. It was a small creature, its body even smaller as it hunkered down in the wheat. Although its face was obscured by the wheat stalks, it was clearly not human in nature.
What?
The shocked Peter wanted to shout a warning to his colleagues, but the creature, a demi-human, spoke first.
Hey, pal. Could you put down your weapons, please?
The diminutive demi-human already had its blade drawn, and no matter how fast Peter moved, his opponent could still stab him first.
Not so fast. Drop your weapons. And would you tell the people behind you, too? I wouldn't want to have to shoot them with my bow here.
There were faint sounds from another direction. When he looked to the source of those sounds, he found that there was a marvelously camouflaged hole in the wheat fields, with half a demi-human sticking out of it. The demi-human was covered in wheat stalks as further camouflage. Peter was filled with doubt. It would seem there was room to negotiate with these creatures.
Could you spare our lives?
Of course, if you surrender, that is.
Peter was at a loss for what to do next. He had to stay in front and make sure the arrows did not hit Nfirea on the wagon. He also needed to figure out the enemy's number and organization. Verifying the opposition's objectives was also important. At the moment, he couldn't surrender, but neither could he entirely deny the enemy's proposition. As though sensing Peter's confusion, the two demi-humans rose from the plains with a rustle.
Goblins.
The demi-humans who stood before them now were of the same species as the goblins from yesterday. They had their bows raised, and their eyes were keen as they took aim. Should they fight? Nina, Lukrut, and Dine looked at each other, pondering that question. Goblins were inferior to human beings in height, weight, muscle power, and other physical parameters. They were hard to deal with in the dark because they possessed night vision, but under the light of day, they were hardly fearsome opponents for the veteran Swords of Darkness. In addition, they had Ainz, who could take care of them easily like he had yesterday. Peter was confident that they could make it through even a pincer attack, as long as their opponents were goblins. However, there was a reason why Peter could not immediately make that decision. His adventurer's instincts told him that these goblins were different from the ones he had fought yesterday. Simply put, the goblins in front of him seemed trained and experienced. In addition, they were in good physical shape. In contrast to the scrawny, weak goblins from yesterday, these goblins had bodies of rippling muscle. In addition, the goblin archers had an excellent shooting stance. If the goblins yesterday were children playing with sticks, these goblins were warriors, adept at using their bows. Finally, their weapons were well made and well maintained, easily rivaling the weapons of the Swords of Darkness. Just as humans could become strong through training, monsters could as well. Demi-humans like goblins could certainly do so too. Therefore, it was quite possible that the goblins before the Swords of Darkness were stronger than any demi-human foe they had ever fought. Just then, a voice cut through the wind blowing over the wheat fields, and Lukrut hurriedly looked behind.
You caught me, huh?
A goblin popped his head out from the fields and stuck his tongue out at them. He must have been trying to sneak up on them from behind, but his stealth skills were not good enough to evade the senses of Lukrut the Ranger. However, Their situation was hardly improved, even after discovering the goblin infiltrator. A calm look at their surroundings revealed movements throughout the wheat fields, as though something was hiding inside them. These movements were centered on the wagon and slowly drew closer. They were in a very bad situation. The Swords of Darkness could not think of any way to break through their current difficulties. Ainz raised his hand to stop Narberl from killing them all. After examining the goblins, he was certain that his guess was correct.
They should be the goblins summoned from the Horn of the Goblin General.
If the girl who had received that horn was controlling these goblins, then he had to avoid antagonizing them as much as possible. If that wasn't the case, they would have to think of something else. However, they were not enemies of Ainz and Narberl, so it should be fine. The goblin from before looked over to Ainz, who stood tall and steady, and said,
"We hope you don't make any sudden moves, guy in the full plate. We don't want to start a fight."
The voice was stiff and full of caution, as Ainz stopped Narberl from lashing out.
Relax. If you don't attack, neither will we.
Thanks for that. These guys are strong, but they aren't scary. You, however, are a different matter. So is the lady beside you. When I think about the two of you as enemies, my hair stands on end.
Ainz did not reply, but shrugged.
Please wait here a bit before the boss arrives.
Who's that boss you're talking about? Did she take over Carne Village?
Nfirea's agitation was reflected in the obvious surprise on the goblins' faces.
Nfirea, calm down a little. It should be pretty obvious who has the advantage here. In addition, there's a few more oddities about the village based on Miss Nabe's words. I'm hoping we can avoid pointless fighting before the truth comes out.
Nfirea was hard-pressed to hide his anxiety despite Nina's words. The look of immediate confrontation on his face became one of barely restrained frustration. He clenched his fists tightly, and then slowly released them. Ainz was surprised and confused by Nfirea's intense reaction as well. Granted, they had not traveled together for long, and he did not know the lad all that well. However, he did not think that Nfirea would be so excited about something like this. It was possible that this village was not just a simple place to gather herbs, but it had some other significance to him. Ainz turned a doubting eye on Nfirea. On the other side, the goblins seemed to have sensed Nfirea's anger, and they looked at each other in confusion.
Something's not quite right here. We're just guarding a lady's village because it was recently attacked by guys dressed like Imperial Knights.
The village was attacked? Is she alright?
As though in response to Nfirea's shouts, a girl appeared at the entrance to the village, escorted by more goblins. As he saw the girl, Nfirea's eyes went wide, and he shouted her name with all his strength.
Henry!
The girl heard the shout and responded in turn. Her voice was gentle and filled with kindness, as though addressing a close friend.
Nfirea!
At this moment, Ainz recalled what he had heard earlier.
The alchemist who comes by our village, my friend, knows how to use magic.
It would seem that her herbalist friend was not a woman, but a man.